Prager U. Asking the real questions here tonight. Are conservatives the real environmentalists? Or they're making a statement, excuse me. Conservatives are the real environmentalists. Let's just find out about that, shall we?
I hate clean air and water. I don't care how much companies pollute rivers and streams. I don't even like trees. I just care about tax cuts. Who am I? Well, that's easy. I'm a conservative.
Yeah? Where's the lie?
Or at least I'm a progressive caricature of a conservative. But the
No, that's pretty much the result of your actions. I mean, of a conservative's actions.
caricature is absurd on its face. Conservatives breathe the same air and drink the same water environmentalists do. Conservatives love taking their kids to the same national parks environmentalists do. In fact, the whole idea of national parks was created by a Republican, Ulysses Grant. The park
Right, before the great party switch. So this isn't really the argument you think it is, my dude.
system was greatly expanded by another Republican, Teddy Roosevelt. And the Environmental Protection Agency was, yes, established by a Republican, Richard Nixon.
This is true. Richard Nixon did establish the EPA, one of the few good things he accomplished before he resigned.
He liked clean air too. Conservatives want to conserve things. It's right there in the name. And one of the things we want to conserve is our environment, because you
Oh, how is he going to explain conservatives want to conserve the environment? This should be good.
can't have a healthy community without a healthy natural environment. That wasn't even hard for me to say.
Didn't he also push out indigenous people out of parks as well? Probably. That sounds like something Nixon would do.
Because I believe it. Conservatives love the environment every bit as much as environmentalists do. The question is, what is the best way to protect it? And here's where we have big differences. The environmentalists say the best way, the only way, is through massive federal and even international regulations. Conservatives
Yes, because that's the only way to properly regulate and control corporations without having the government controlling, or the people, ideally, controlling the companies. I mean, those are your choices. Either the people control the companies or you accept strong federal and international regulations.
say the best way to protect the environment is by protecting property rights and encouraging innovation, safer, more efficient power, nuclear, geothermal, biomass, anything that generates energy at a price consumers want and can afford to pay. To the extent that government gets involved in conservation, say protecting wildlife, it should get involved at the most local level possible, since the farmer, forester, or fisherman in Oregon knows a lot more about his environment than some bureaucrat in
Oh, so it's just a glorified states' rights.
Washington, D.C., or Brussels. So how can we tell which way works best? Let's examine the historical record. Today, and for the last century, the worst environmental offenders have been big, repressive, socialist governments. This was true.
Big, yes. Repressive, yes. Socialist? Because he's obviously going to be referring to, like, the Soviet Union and China, which are not socialist.
True in the last century, and it's true now. China, for example, pumps roughly twice as much carbon into the air each year as the United States, even though the U.S. economy is almost 60% larger than China's. And how do
Yes, China is a much larger manufacturer, which is where a lot of that pollution comes from. And they're also less so now, but further behind on the industrialization scale.
those international agreements fare at protecting the environment? Not too well, it turns out. When President Trump announced his intention to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord, environmentalists warned of imminent disaster. Yet a year later, it turned out that the United States led the world in reducing carbon emissions. It did
Well, yes, partially because with us pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, we put less pressure on other countries to reduce their emissions. So since we already had systems and things in place to reduce carbon emissions, expecting to agree to the Paris Climate Accord, we led a year later. But I don't think things are as rosy now.
did so without surrendering its national sovereignty. Moreover, Canada, the EU, and China, all signatories to the Paris Accord, not only failed to live up to their commitments, but increased their annual carbon emissions. The EU released an additional 40 million tons.
They actually have citations now? Hold on, I want to check this out. I didn't know Prager U did citations anymore. Interesting. That's bizarre.
Into the air that year. China, a whopping 120 million additional tons, all while wagging their fingers at Uncle Sam. Here's what you won't hear from your neighborhood Greenpeace volunteer. The left favors big government solutions not because it's better for the environment, but because it's better for leftism. Take a look.
No, it's because the government is the only force we have that can counteract the billionaires. And even so, it's not great at that. Yeah, it's not that we think big government is the only solution, or the best solution. It's the only solution, well, it's the only solution you've left us other than the final one.
Look at the Green New Deal, an environmental proposal embraced by virtually every major progressive in America. Forget for a moment the impracticality of a plan that would outlaw most forms of American energy and cost $93 trillion. Much of the proposal has nothing to do with the environment. Socialized medicine,
I know there's been a lot of talk about banning fracking and things like that. And while I do think we need to reduce that, and banning it would be good, so something I would say, and a point I would make about Prager U in general, is that their goal is to make the left look inferior to the right in every respect. Absolutely true, yes. In this particular example, they're making the left look like weak-willed people who want to give up their independence and sovereignty versus the rugged conservative who just wants to be in charge of his own destiny type thing. Very true.
reparations for historical wrongs, and a jobs guarantee program are just a few of the items on its wish list. What do socialized medicine and reparations for slavery have to do with the environment? Well, nothing. But for supporters of the Green New Deal, that's okay.
Except that the Green New Deal was not just an environmentalist deal. It was supposed to be a New Deal like the original New Deal was, which was a total overhaul of the economy and the way our system worked. That's why socialized medicine and stuff like that was included in it. It wasn't just about the environment, it's just climate change is the most important thing we faced until COVID. So what he is trying to say, and what every Prager U video is ultimately about, is how the left is inferior to the right, and that sense of inferiority is a feeling people go along with. It isn't factual. Right. Yes. Leftists are viewed as either ineffectual white college dudes or the blue-haired SJW stereotype. I mean, the typical contradiction of fascism. They are both simultaneously powerful enough to change everything you care about, and yet weak enough that they can just be ignored.
Because their primary goal is increasing government power well beyond anything we've ever seen in America. They need this power, presumably, to save us from ourselves. In contrast, conservatives are all about,
well, to save the workers from the companies, yes.
innovating our way to a cleaner environment.
Approaching Prager U by trying to debunk them is ultimately pointless because they can just make new, slightly different arguments. What you need to do, what everyone needs to do, is talk about how their feelings are misguided and how the right is taking advantage of people. Oh yeah, I agree.
Without depriving anyone of their freedom. Take, for example, that monster of all green monsters, horizontal drilling for oil and gas, also known as fracking. The left demonizes fracking, even though it...
So the reason why the left is demonizing fracking and why they always paint it as a jobs issue is because ultimately we need to break our dependence on things like hydraulic fracturing and of course our dependence on fossil fuels. All of those are important things that we need to break our dependence on if we're going to beat climate change. So by making it seem like the left just wants to use the government to take over businesses and things like that, it ignores what we're actually trying to do, which is restructure our system so that we have a sustainable power grid and other systems that can survive climate change. So by phrasing it as a job issue, they can sidestep the environmental issue.
What actually makes the environment cleaner. The
What? I mean, it makes
country
companies
richer,
richer, yes. Makes the environment cleaner? I gotta see this.
and now independent of Middle Eastern oil, something thought impossible a decade ago. How does it make the environment cleaner? By releasing up to 50% less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than coal.
But it's still releasing CO2 into the atmosphere more than our biosystem can handle it. See, this is something that I see a lot. This is how cookies get away with 50% less fat before the FDA cracked down on shit like that. They made them 50% smaller. So if the cookie is 50% smaller, it has 50% less fat. So by releasing up to 50% less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than coal, which is of course ignoring the effects that the initial mining has, although I honestly don't know if there's a significant difference between mining for coal and fracturing, traditional coal and hydraulic fracturing, but it's still releasing carbon dioxide.
And since it's also cheaper, people are happy to buy it. Not because government forces them to, but because it saves them money. By the way, according to a Harvard study, fracking is safe and improving all the time. Yep, innovation
I'm not even going to bother checking the source.
That produces abundant clean energy.
Because it's also worth noting that the runoff from fracking is significantly more damaging to the environment than coal mining, which causes more carbon to release into the atmosphere via death of plant and animal life. Yep, like I was saying, just because fracking releases 50% less coal when it's burned or whatever, doesn't mean there aren't other knock-on effects that already make it worse than coal. And that's, again, ignoring the fact that releasing CO2 into the atmosphere is already bad and is something that should be minimized as much as possible.
At a fair price without infringing on my freedom. That works for this conservative. You'd think it would work for anyone who cares about the environment and people. So let me repeat, I love clean air and water. And I don't own even a single share of Exxon. I'm Michael Knowles, host of The Michael Knowles Show for Prager University. Thank you.
And perhaps more pertinently, it's more harmful to people. You've seen those videos of people lighting their water lines on fire, right? Yeah.
I can often hold a standard kitchen match to my water. Just like that.
There. Water isn't supposed to do that. That's what fracking does.
Now, Chesapeake is going to say, well, there's...
So it's still releasing CO2, and it's causing people's water to be flammable. Like, the one thing you go to when fire is around is water. So no, conservatives are not the real environmentalists. They're whatever the opposite of an environmentalist is. I guess a corporatist. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you. See you next time.